Today's daf is Kuf, number 100 in Eruvin. We're going to start 99, Tzaditet Amud Bet, at the bottom of the page, the new Mishnah. Ilan Shaya Mesech al Aretz. You have a tree. The branches of the tree cover over the ground. So Im en nofo gavoa min haaretz shlosha tfachim. If the branches are not 3 tefachim above the ground, meaning to say that they come down, let's say imagine a tree where the branches are in an arch. So they come down. If they're within 3 tefachim of the ground, metaltalin tachtav, then you can carry under the branches of the tree. In other words, it creates an enclosure around that space. However, shorashav gvoim min haaretz gimel tefachim lo yeshev alehen. A contrast with that is the roots of the tree. Now we know you can't climb on a tree on Shabbat, you can't use a tree on Shabbat, you can't lean on a tree on Shabbat. What about the roots of the tree? So if the roots protrude from the ground 3 tefachim, more than 3 tefachim, let's say, or 3 tefachim or more, so then they're considered a tree distinct from the ground. If the roots are within 3 tefachim of the ground, a tefach is a hand's breadth, within 3 tefachim of the ground, then they're considered part of the ground. So sitting on them is not considered sitting on the tree, it's considered sitting on the ground. So Amar Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua, said, Ein metaltalin bo yoter mi bet tzatayim, that you can carry underneath a tree that has these branches that arc downwards and create an enclosure, but only up to Bet Tzatayim. Bet Tzatayim is 5,000 square amot, and we've said many times that the rabbis made a decree, an area that's enclosed, if it's enclosed, not ladira, it's not hukaf ladira, it's just enclosed, let's say a field is enclosed. So that has a limit on how large it can be. So a house could be, you could be, 1,000,000 square feet, it doesn't matter, because it's made for residence. But something that's not for residence, like a field, if it's enclosed, it can only be up to 5,000 square amot. That's the limit. So the same with the tree. Mai ta'ama, what's the reason? Mishum da'aved dira shetashmisha la'avir. V'chol dira shetashmisha la'avir en metaltalin ba'yeter mi bet tzatayim. That the reason is because this tree is made, and we turn to Kuf Amud Aleph, this tree house, whatever you want to call it, this tree enclosure is not made to live underneath. It's made what's called tashmisha avir, which means the function of it is to guard the fields. The function of it is for what's outside of it. Somebody sits under the shade of the tree. Somebody sits under the shade of the tree in order to look out at the field around him. So it's called tashmisha avir. The usage of it is for what's outside of it, and therefore we don't apply to it, or we do apply to it the rule of the karpaf. The karpaf having a limit of 5,000 square amot. Other people say the reason why it's different than, let's say, a residence is because the shomer, who will use this tree? Somebody who's watching the fields during the day and he wants shade. He doesn't stay there at nighttime. So it's not a real residence. It's something where a person uses, first of all, for what's outside of it, tashmisha avir, and second of all, he's only using it during the day, but not during the nighttime, because during the nighttime, he's going to go home to his regular house. Now, this is a picture. They have some colorful pictures here on page 352 of this tree, but 352 is the regular tree. Now, the Gemara now brings up an issue where it gets a little complicated. Itmar, it was stated, Shorshe ilan haba'in milmala mishlosha letoch shlosha. Now we know that if the roots of the tree are 3 tefachim above the ground, then it's not considered part of the ground. It's considered to be distinct from the ground, and therefore you can't sit on it, you can't use it, because it's a tree. What happens if it comes up above 3 tefachim, but then it goes back down again? Okay? So, in other words, it lowers down again. So, Rabbah Amar Mutal Ishtamesh Ben. So, Rabbah says the part that's below 3 tefachim, you can use that part. You just can't use the part that's above 3 tefachim. Use the part that's below 3 tefachim, no problem. However, Rav Sheshet Amar, Rabbi 6, Rav Sheshet Amar, Asur L'ishtamesh Ben. You can't use it. Why? Now we'll see the reason. Rabbah Amar Mutal Ishtamesh Ben Dochol Pachot Migim Ta'ara Arahi. Rabbah says, whatever is within 3 tefachim of the ground, it's considered part of the ground. We don't care that the root, let's say, goes like this. Now, is there a drawing of this? Yes. So look, on the right side of drawing number 353 is what we're talking about. So if it's the part that's above 3 Tvachim, everybody agrees you can't use that. What about this part? What about this part? According to Rabbah, that's okay to use. According to Rav Sheshet, no. We look at the whole thing as one entity. You can't say this part is okay, this part is not okay. It's all connected. Rav Sheshet said. Okay, now, that's what Rav Sheshet says. Since they come from the koach, from the strength of something which is prohibited, they're also prohibited. Meaning they're all part of one entity. You can't separate them out. Another case, the damu kemishunita. What happens if it's like a mishunita? What's mishunita? Take a look over here. So, mishunita means that it curves around, okay? The entity curves around, and there are pieces that come out of it. Some pieces come lower than 3 Tvachim. This is the left side of drawing number 353. Some come from the top, some come from the middle, some come from the bottom. So what's the issue here? The issue is what you have is a situation where, look, there are like 3 branches coming out of the main root. One is low. The low one, everyone is going to agree is fine. Because from the beginning to the end of it, it is below 3 Tvachim. The top one, everybody's going to agree is no good because from beginning to end, it is above 3 Tvachim. But what about the middle one? The beginning is above 3 Tvachim. The end of it is below. Okay, so it's going to be the same machloket between Rav Sheshet and Rabbah. Again, that's why it says the damud kimishunita, the salkin le'ela, the one that is on the very top, asurin. It's certainly no good. The nahtin le'tata'i, the one that comes below, sharu. Everyone's going to say it's fine because the one below is completely below 3 Tvachim. But litzdadin plugta de Rav Sheshet. There you're going to have the machloket between Rabbah and Rav Sheshet. Is the middle one. The middle one, the part of it is above 3 Tvachim and the rest of it is below. So what do? Do we look at the whole branch as one thing, the whole roots rather as one thing? Or do we look at the individual parts? That coordinate, is it above or below 3 Tvachim? So that's the machloket. Now, similarly, v'chin anigra. What's anigra? Anigra is a tree that is in an irrigation ditch. So what happens is, and I have a lovely drawing here. So the tree that's in the anigra, it's 354. So you have 2 sides of the tree are flanked by earth. Okay. So what do we do here? And then you have things that are protruding. Let's say you have the branch or a root that is above 3 Tvachim if you're measuring from the bottom of the tree. But this tree has the banks of this irrigation ditch next to it. So do we measure from the top of the irrigation ditch bank? In other words, do we measure it from the ground? Or since actually the tree is lower than the ground, it's lower than ground level. So should we measure from the bottom of the tree or should we measure from the ground? Okay? Since it's below ground level in this case because it's in a ditch. And so so that's the same issue. According to Rav Sheshet, what are we going to have to do? We're going to have to measure from the bottom of the tree, not the ditch, not the walls of the ditch that are higher. Why? Because since if you're standing here, these branches are above 3 Tvachim or these roots are above 3 Tvachim. Since that's the case, Rav Sheshet says since from any angle it's 3 Tvachim, it's no good. Rabbah says no. If you're here, in other words, if you're standing on the side, for you, this is within 3 Tvachim. Why should you have to worry about what it looks like for somebody standing in the ditch? So, and if it were, let's say, a root that was protruding here over the opening of the ditch, then everybody would agree. Somebody who's accessing that is 3 Tvachim, there's 3 Tvachim here. But if you're on the side, Rav Sheshet will say, well, since you were here, from here, it's more than 3 Tvachim, then even though you're standing here, and it's less than 3 Tvachim for you, you have to count it as 3 Tvachim. That's the way Rav Sheshet looks at it. Rabbah says no. And, v'chen bekeren zavit, similarly, a tree that is in the corner of a house. Now, they don't actually have that picture here, but I'm sorry, the corner of a wall. They don't have that picture, but basically what that means is that you have, instead of 2 sides of the tree being covered, they have it there, there you go, that's a good picture. So instead of, in the Steinsaltz they have a good picture. So instead of only 2 walls being covered, of 2 sides of the tree, here you have all 3 sides of the tree are enclosed by this wall. and the tree itself is in the corner. You see that? So if you're standing inside the wall, what happens? Then you would count from here. 3 tefachim is, let's say, going to be here. But if you count from the top of the wall, what are you going to have? You're not going to start counting till here. It gives you a lot more leeway. You don't have to start till the top of the wall. So according to Rabbah, since it's enclosed on 3 sides, we can say that wall is where we start counting from. We start counting 3. Only something that's 3 tefachim above here, above the top of the wall, is going to count. Because this tree is enclosed by the wall, or it's embedded in the wall. Whereas according to Rav Sheshet, since this one side of the tree is exposed, and if you were standing in this area, you would see anything this high as being 3 tefachim, even though it's below the wall, right? But you're standing here. So this is your 3 tefachim. So any branch coming here should be a problem. Rabbah says, no, since if you're in the back, let's say, you'll see that the other 3 sides of the tree are enclosed by the wall. We should only count from here. That's a big difference. If you're counting from the top of the wall, or you're counting from the bottom of the tree. Okay, so that's the machloka between Rabbah and Rav Sheshet. Now, that's pretty much all you have to worry about today in terms of complicated diagrams. So feel much better now. Okay, now, what happened was, there was a certain tree, palm tree, Abaye owned a palm tree, but there was something really unusual about this palm tree. This is a trend that has not caught on in our society, which is having a tree in your house. The tree protruded through the skylight of his house. Now, he said to Rav Yosef, listen, if I'm sitting on the roof of my house, and I want to have a little barbecue party on the roof, okay, so the tree only protrudes less than 3 tefachim from the roof. So if I'm sitting on the roof, all I see, now here's another good drawing. So it's not a complicated drawing though, I promise, but it's a nice drawing just to give you an idea of what it would look like. If you're in the house, what do you see? The big trunk of the tree. But if you're sitting here on the roof, in illustration number 355, you're sitting here on the roof, what do you see? Just the very top of the tree. So from the floor of the roof, so to speak, you have less than 3 tefachim of height to where the branches are. So those branches are within 3 tefachim. You see that? See, or the top of the tree is within 3 tefachim. If you're in the house, it's way higher. Okay? So Abaye wanted to know, can I sit on my roof and use the part of the tree that protrudes through the roof, since it's less than 3 tefachim from where I'm sitting when I'm sitting on the roof. In other words, this is about relative perspective, right? There's a little bit of relativity here. Okay, it depends what your perspective is. If you're in the house, if you're on the roof. Now, what happens? So Rav Yosef allowed him to use it. Amar Rav Chabar Tachlifa. Rav Chabar Tachlifa said, "Desharalach ke Rabbah sharalach." I want you to know that the fact that he allows you to use it is only based on Rabbah's position. Why? Because Rav Sheshet would say, since from in the house this looks like it's 10 feet tall, I don't care that from where you are right now, from the roof, you only see 3 tefachim coming up. If you're in the house, you see that it's 12 feet tall, the tree. How can you say that branch is within 3 tefachim of the ground? Right, that's what Rav Sheshet would say. Rabbah would say, no, since from the perspective of the roof, when you're sitting on the roof, all you see is 3 tefachim, you're good. So the Gemara says, Pshita, that's obvious that Rabbah is the only one who would agree, and Rav Sheshet would disagree. Ma'u detema, what would you think? Afilu the Rav Sheshet betakiman demaledame v'lishtamesh bepachot migel samuch legag kamashmalan. Because you might have thought that even according to Rav Sheshet, whatever is in a house, a house is looked at as a solid substance. The whole inside of the house is solid. So we would look at the entire house as a solid block. We don't say, well, since you're standing in the house, you see the tree going up to the ceiling. No. We say that entire house is like a piece of wood, a solid block of wood. Where does the tree protrude? Only on the roof. What you can see in the house doesn't count, because the house is all one solid entity. We see this halachic concept many times. Throwing an object through the house. Some say, oh, well, the whole house is like keman demalia damya. We look at it as something which is full and therefore completely solid. Right? So you might have thought that. So therefore, Kamash Malani comes to tell you that Rav Sheshet would not subscribe to this principle of Rabbah. Even in this case, he would say, since from inside the house it's 12 feet high, it doesn't matter that from the roof it looks like only 3 tefachim. And now, as I used to say in yeshiva, going weiter. Right? Now we say, Tenan, says in the Mishnah, Shorashav Gevoin Minaretz Gimel Tfachim Lo Yeshev Aleim. Let's go back to our Mishnah to try to resolve the dispute between Rabbah and Rav Sheshet. It says in the Mishnah that if these roots protrude higher than 3 Tfachim, what do we say? You can't sit on them. So, what case are we talking about here? If we're talking about a case where they don't curve back to lower than Gimel Tfachim, so obviously, how could you sit on something more than 3 Tfachim? It's a tree. Rather, what must the Mishnah be talking about? It can't be talking about a case where the root simply protrudes 3 Tfachim. We know you're not allowed to use a tree. So it must be talking about a case where it curves back. And yet the Mishnah says, you can't use it. So who is that following? Rav Sheshet. Because Rav Sheshet says it curves back, it doesn't matter. Since it has a part that's above 3 Tfachim, the whole thing's above 3 Tfachim. The Gemara says no. Really, the Mishnah is talking about a case where it doesn't curve back. What's the chidush of the Mishnah then? Why does it have to tell us that roots that protrude 3 Tfachim in the air are considered to be a tree, and therefore you can't sit on them? Isn't it obvious? If we're not talking about a root that curves back down, no. Even Rabbah would agree, because we're talking about a case where the root, one side of the root is even with the ground. The ground is not level. The ground drops off. So part of it is, in other words, the root never changes. The root's always the same. The root doesn't curve around. The root doesn't have a part that's higher or lower. The root is flat. But the only thing is that the ground, there's a part of it that is level with the ground. So let's see if they have a picture of that to show us what they're talking about. Yeah. So if you look here, yeah. So look, 356. Oh no, that's the other one. That's the other one. That's not this one. Well, I mean. Yeah, it's the same concept though. In other words, the point is that on one side, the ground is higher, so the root is resting on the ground. And in one place, the ground is lower. Now it could either be because there's a ditch in the ground at some point, or it could be because the ground is higher at one point. But even though the root is directly resting on the ground on one side, if there's another side that's open, there even Rabbah will agree. Okay, because it's not a matter of curvature of the of the root, where part of it is in one place and part of it is in another place. The root is all one thing. It just happens to be that on one side the ground is higher or the ground is lower. There we look at the root all as one thing, even according to Rabbah, and he would say that you cannot sit on that. So Tanu Rabbah and the rabbis taught. We just saw that picture. Because you cannot sit on a tree and you can't hang on a tree, and you can't lean on a tree. So the point is that even though the root is even, okay, and even though one side of it is completely on the ground, since the ground goes down, not that the root curves, the ground goes down at one point, and it is clearly 3 Tfachim above the ground, the whole thing is now prohibited, even though part of it is actually physically resting on the ground. Okay, so now we don't create a leniency since part of it is resting on the ground if part of it is clearly above the ground, 3 Tfachim. So okay, so now the Baraita goes on and says, you can't go up in the tree and say, you know what, I like the tree. I'm going to go up in the tree on Friday and I'm just going to spend Shabbat in the tree. I like trees. No, you can't do that. Same with an animal. You're not allowed to sit on an animal or ride on an animal on Shabbat. You can't get on the animal before Shabbat and ride it all Shabbat. Say, I wasn't oleh, but I didn't go up onto the tree. I didn't go up onto the animal on Shabbat. I was here already. I said, I'm a cowboy. I sit on the horse all day. You can't do that. However, when it comes to a cistern or a pit or a cave or a fence, a wall, you can climb up and down them all day. No matter how tall they are. In other words, it's not about exertion. It's not about you can't climb the tree because climbing trees is exertion. No, you can climb any other physical structure, just not a tree, because we're worried about the possibility of pulling a branch out of the tree or pulling berries off the tree, whatever it is. We're worried about some kind of use of the tree that could lead to a deoraita prohibition. That's why you're not allowed to climb on. Tanei Chada, we learned in one Braita, Im Alam Mutar Lered. It says in one Braita that if you go up in the tree by accident, you forgot that you're not allowed to climb trees on Shabbat, and now you're in the tree. It says you can come down. V'Tanei Chada, and it says in another Braita, Asur Lered, that you can't come down. Okay, you have to stay up there the whole day. You forgot you weren't allowed to go up in the tree. Now you're stuck there. So what's the resolution of these two braytot? La kashya, no problem. Kan mi ba'od yom, kan mi shachashecha. One that says that if you went up in the tree, you're allowed to come down, is talking about when you went up on the tree on Friday, and now you're stranded up there, and Shabbat started. What do? It says you can come down. The other one is saying when you went up on Shabbat itself, once you went up on Shabbat itself, you can't come down. Or, alternatively, another interpretation would be both are talking about where it was already Shabbat, but no problem. Kan b'shogeg, kan b'mezid. One is talking about when you went up in the tree by accident, so the rabbis allow you to come back down. But when you went up on purpose, you knew you weren't allowed to, and now you hear that you smell the delicious scents of the Shabbat meal. You want to go to lunch, and you can't get down out of the tree. Sorry. You decided to violate the prohibition of going in the tree. You can't come down. You did it b'mezid. Alternatively, maybe both of them are talking about bishogeg, and still there's a difference. We have a general halachic dispute throughout Shas. If we are kones, what's called shogeg atu mezid, if somebody does something by accident, do we penalize them to discourage them from doing it on purpose? We know that when somebody does something on purpose, we can penalize them. What about somebody who does it by accident? Should we penalize them? It's like our law in America holds that kansu shogeg atu mezid. Because let's say a person by accident runs a stop sign. They didn't see it. It was a mistake. They still give you the same knas. They don't care. You didn't see the sign that said 30 miles an hour and you went 70 miles an hour. They don't care. It was an accident. It could be really an accident. You didn't know. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's like modern. That's a modern idea, right? But yeah, it's the same concept. It's a knas because really you didn't do any damage when you speed. So a knas is when you didn't do any damage, but they charge you anyway. Okay, so but that's the same concept. Now you can't say I didn't know.
Is this rabbi not knowing of the law or just lapse of memory?
Either one. It could be either one. So that both are defined as bishogeg.
Sometimes we don't see the
Right. Now there is an opinion in Masekhet Shabbat that if you don't know what you're doing, in other words, you didn't realize you were going 70, you weren't paying attention, you thought you were going 30, your mind wanders, sometimes you start speeding, you don't realize it because you're distracted, and then you look at the speedometer and you realize you're going too fast. That is a machloket in Masekhet Shabbat between Abaye and Rava, whether that's considered mitasek. Maybe it's even lower than bishogeg, because bishogeg is where you forgot the law or you didn't know the law, and mitasek is where you didn't realize what you were even doing. That's a lower level of awareness.
So that would be the case.
That was a machloket.
The speedometer is broken and you prove it after you get the ticket.
Right. So that's mitasek. That's mitasek. Or that would be, I guess, the best case. That would be the best case of it. Yeah. So Amar Ravona Braid Rav Yoshua, Ravona the son of Rav Yoshua said, we could actually trace back this machloket about a person who goes into a tree, whether they're allowed to come down or not. Swiss Family Robinson, what do they do on Shabbat? Right. Good thing they weren't Jewish, they didn't have a problem. Right, Tarzan is not, I don't know his status, halachic status, I don't know. But certainly, so let's say, how do they come down? So how do you have a machloket, actually Tanaim, but maybe this machloket Tanaim could be the basis for this distinction of whether you could come down from the tree or not if you went up on Shabbat, because this is a case that comes up in several contexts. Hanitanin b'matana achat. Although in our daf, I don't think we've come across this machloket yet. I can't remember coming across it yet in the daf of this cycle of Daf Yomi. It does come up in a couple of other places. Hanitanin b'matana achat shenit'aravu b'nitanin b'matana achat yinatnu b'matana achat. So if a person, let's say the Kohen, so there are certain korbanot that they require one application of blood to the altar, like a Bechor, for example. One application of blood, that's it. There are some that are Shenaim Shein Arba. There are some that require 2 applications that are 4, and there are some that require 4 applications. Okay, 2 applications that are 4 means you put it on, let's say the corners that encompass 2 corners. Like southeast and northwest would cover all the different possibilities. So, for example, but anyway, the point is here you have different korbanot. Either a korban that requires one matan damim, and a korban that requires one. So two different people brought their bechorot, and you mix the blood together by accident. So it's very simple. You apply it one. Or let's say matan dalet and matan dalet. Let's say you had two korbanot that require 4 applications of blood to the altar. No problem. For example, a chatat, they get mixed together. So yinatnu b'matan dalet. So you just put 4 applications. You know that all the blood in this canister requires 4 applications. It doesn't matter. One belongs to you. One belongs to you. It's the same korban. But what happens though? Matan arba b'matan achat. What happens when you have blood from a korban that requires 4 applications gets mixed with blood from one that requires 1? What's the problem? If we do only 1, then we're cheating one of the korbanot. The one that required 4 is only getting 1 application. And if we do 4, then the one that requires only 1 application is getting 4. It's getting extra. So what do? Rabbi Eliezer says, "Yinatnu b'matan daled." Just apply all 4. Better more than less. For Rabbi Yoshua Omer, "Yinatnu b'matan achat." Rabbi Yoshua says, put 1. Don't do more than you need. It's like if you forgot if you took certain medication. Usually it's better not to take it again because, maybe you're going to OD on the medication. You don't know what you're going to do. So one side says, put 4, and okay, you put a little extra for the 1, no big deal. The other one says, put only 1 because it's better not to put extra for the one that requires only 1 application of blood. Amar lo Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer said to Rabbi Yoshua, Harehu over al bal tigra. You're subtracting from the mitzvah. This is bal tigra. It says you're not allowed to subtract from the Torah, right? Lo tosif alav velo tigra mimeno. Don't add on to the Torah, don't subtract. And what are you doing? You're taking a korban. You know there's a korban in there that required 4 applications of blood, and you're applying it only once. That's subtracting. Amar la Rabbi Yoshua said to him, but according to you, you're adding. Because you know that there's a korban in there that only requires 1 application of blood, and you're going to do all the blood 4 times, because it got mixed together. So what do you see from here? Amar Rabbi Eliezer, I'll show the application in a second. Amar Rabbi Eliezer says, Lo amru el kishu b'atzmo. Amar lo Rabbi Yoshua, lo nemar bal tigra el kishu b'atzmo. So they each give the same response. Right? Rabbi Eliezer says, I say that the only time Bal Tosif applies, the only time adding onto the mitzvah applies, is when the blood is by itself. In other words, if I were to take pure blood of a bechor, that's only supposed to have 1 application, and I were to apply it 4 times, that's Bal Tosif. That's adding. But here I have a halachic reason for doing it, because I know that intermingled with this blood of 1 application is blood that's supposed to have 4. So I have a good reason. I'm not just adding. And what does Rabbi Yoshua say? He says, I'm saying the same thing. I say subtracting from a mitzvah only applies when it's by itself. So if I were to take a chatat and say, I'm lazy today, instead of applying 4, I'm going to put 1 application. That's no good. But if it's mixed with a bukhar, blood, and I know that the bukhar is only supposed to be applied once, I have a halachic reason to only do once. Do you see? So ve'od am Rabbi Yoshua, and furthermore Rabbi Yoshua says, Kishenatata avarta al bal tosif ve'asita masa biyadecha. When you do extra, Rabbi Yoshua says, you're violating bal tosif ve'asita masa biyadecha, and you're doing it masa biyadayim. You're doing it through an action. Even if you're going to tell me that you're right, that there's an issue of subtracting from the mitzvah here, at least I'm doing it with what's called shev ve'al ta'aseh. I'm doing it passively. I'm not doing it actively. I'm putting 1 application and I'm refraining from the other 3. So even if I'm wrong, even if I should have put all 4 applications, I'm not doing an action that's wrong. I'm just not doing. I'm just not going to apply them. So what's the relevance of this to going up in a tree? Right? Ma'inyan shmita etzel har Sinai. Right? What does this have to do with anything? So Rabbi Eliezer damaratam kumase adif. So according to Rabbi Eliezer says it's better to do an action. Because what does he say? He says when you have the blood of 1 application mixed with the blood of 4 applications, what do? Do 4. Take action. So Hachanami here too, Yered, he should go down off of the tree. Rabbi Yoshua damaratam sheve'al taseh adif, Hachanami lo Yered. Okay, so how are they inferring one from the other? They say, listen, if you sit in the tree all Shabbat, you're also doing an Averah. Because all day long you're sitting in the tree. if you don't come down. If you lower yourself, you're using the tree to lower yourself. So there's no way out of it. Either way, you're doing an Averah. So one says, Rabbi Eliezer would say, listen, take action and go down the tree, and then you're done. So then at least you're not sitting and doing an Averah for 24 hours. You're going to sit up in the tree, and every second you're passively doing an Averah, the whole Shabbat, by sitting in the tree. Rabbi Yoshua would say better to do a passive violation, sit in the tree, just like he said, better to do only one application of blood and to refrain from the other three, than to take action, which is a decisive violation. So in this case, you're taking action. Right? You're going down the tree. That's no good. Better to stay in the tree. You're passively violating by sitting in the tree, but you're not taking an action. So that's how they want to apply the principle. Now, the Gemara says, Dil Malohi, but actually we could refute this analogy. There's no analogy from the tree to the korbanot. Why? Because Ad kan lo kama Rabbi Eliezer atam kum aseh adif, ela deka avid mitzvah. Aval achad lo avid mitzvah. So, hachinami lo yered. Okay, because Rabbi Eliezer over there is saying, apply the blood 4 times, not just once. Take a risk. In other words, do the extra because you're doing a mitzvah. What's the mitzvah? You're applying the blood 4 times for the korban that requires the 4 times. So even though you might be overdoing it for the korban that only requires 1, at least you're doing a mitzvah. But here, what mitzvah is it to come down out of the tree? There's no mitzvah. You're just getting away from an averah, but you're not doing a mitzvah. And the inami, and similarly, ad kan lo kama Rabbi Yoshua tam shevel taseh adif ella dela ka'avid isura aval hachad ka'avid isura hachinami dieret. And similarly, you're trying to say that Rabbi Yoshua, because he says you should remain in the tree the entire Shabbat, that means he would also, since Rabbi Yoshua says that you should only apply the blood once and you should refrain from the other 3, he would also say, stay in the tree and don't actually get up and use the tree to get down. You're making an analogy, but that's not true. Because refraining from applying the other 3 parts of the application of blood isn't an averah. In other words, you're just not doing anything. You're not going to put those 3 applications. Whereas here, sitting in the tree is itself an averah. Fine, you violate it passively by sitting there, but it's still an averah. So maybe Rabbi Yoshua there would say, no, you should go down. You shouldn't stay where you are. So therefore, you cannot draw an analogy from the case of Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer to this one. Tanya Chada, we learned in one Baraita, Echadilan lach v'echadilan yavesh, v'tanya idach, b'med dvarim amurim, b'lach aval b'yavesh mutar. In one Baraita, it says that you cannot use a moist tree or a dried out tree. And in another Baraita, it says you can't use a moist tree, but you can use a dry tree. Amar Rav Yehuda says, la kasher, no problem. Kan b'shigiz o machlif, kan b'shingiz o machlif. That one is talking about, in other words, it's a contradiction, because one says that yavesh, a dry tree, is not counted like a tree. The other one says it is counted like a tree. So what's the answer? So it depends. Rav Yehuda says it depends. If the tree trunk regenerates, in other words, this tree was cut down, but it's going to grow back. So in potentia, it is another tree. So that's where you can't use it. But if it's something that en giz o machlif, it's not going to grow back, so it's dead basically. It's just a piece of wood stuck in the ground. So you're allowed to use it. The Gemara asks, giz o machlif yavesh karitale. You're telling me that when the Baraita says yavesh, a dried out tree, it's talking about a tree that's going to grow back? That's not a dried out tree, it's just a cut tree. Ela lakasha, rather the resolution is different. Kan bimodachama, kan bimodageshamim. Bimodachama. So in other words, that one is talking about summer, one's talking about winter. In the winter time, you can't tell the difference between a dried out tree that's dead and a live tree. They all look dead because they all lose their leaves. In the summertime, though, you can tell the difference. So in the summertime, we can be lenient and say a tree stump that's dead, you could sit up. One that's alive, you can't. But in the winter, how are you going to tell the difference? So we have to prohibit all of them. But even during the summertime, when you can tell the difference, whatever fruit is still hanging on that tree, you might knock off. What about that problem? We're talking about where there is no fruit. Aren't you going to knock twigs off? We're talking about a case where there are no twigs. In other words, it's just a stump. It's just the body of the tree, the trunk. That's all there is. Can you sit on it? If it's dried out during the summertime, yes, because it's clearly distinguishable from the live trees. Now the Gemara says, Eini, is this really true? Rav came to Apastia v'asar b'gduda, and he told the people they can't even sit on a dried tree stump that has no twigs and no fruit. So why is that? The answer is Rav bik'am matzah v'gadar ba'gader. It says a similar concept in many cases, that Rav came to this place, to Apastia, and he found that the people were not B'nai Torah. They didn't know halacha. And so he had to be stricter with them, to create fences, to create restrictions, to start educating the people. Because when people start out, they need a lot of boundaries. They don't understand halacha well enough to get the nuances. They're not going to know where the lines of demarcation are. So he had to make very absolute rules. Later on, maybe when the people became more educated, he could loosen up the rules. And so therefore, he was stricter even about a case that might halachically be permitted. Now we're going to get into one more halachic point and then a little agadah. So Amar Rami Bar Abba, Amar Rav Asi. Rami Bar Abba said, and according to the side, it should say not Rami Bar Abba, but it should say Rami. What does it say here? Oh, it tells you have to look to see what the different girsa is. It could be somebody else. But anyway, what it says in our text is Rami Bar Abba, Amar Rav Asi, Asur ladam she'elech al gavi asavim b'Shabbat, mishum shneimar va'at b'raglayim choteh. That you're not allowed to walk on grass on Shabbat, because it says ve'at b'raglayim choteh. A person who rushes with his feet is a sinner. Okay, Taneh Chada, but it says in another Braita, Mutar lelech al gavi asavim b'Shabbat, that you're allowed to. V'Taneh Idach Asur. Why does it say in one Braita that you're allowed to walk on grass, and in one it says you're not? Lakashe, no problem. Because it depends. Wet grass you're not allowed to walk on, because the wet grass is alive, and you're going to be pulling it out. That's kotzer. That's pulling something alive out of its source of growth. However, biveshim, when they're dried out, when the grass is dead, the brown grass, the dead grass, you can walk on that because there's no concern about pulling it out of the ground. Alternatively, they could both be talking about moist grass that's alive, but it depends. One is talking about the summertime, one is talking about the wintertime. Okay? In other words, in the wintertime, the grass is dead. Okay, in the summertime the grass is alive. So it doesn't even matter. Even the moist grass is not going to be growing. Alternatively, that both of them are talking about summertime. No problem. It depends if you're wearing shoes or not. Okay? The Braita that said you can walk on grass is when you're wearing shoes. The one that says you can't walk on grass is when you're not wearing shoes, because when you're not wearing shoes, the grass tangles in with your feet and you pull it out. Alternatively, they could both be talking about where you're wearing shoes. But it depends. Are these spiky shoes or smooth shoes? Spiky shoes will pull grass out of the ground. Smooth shoes will not. Alternatively, it depends though what kind of grass it is. If it's very short grass, even if you have spiky shoes, short grass won't get caught up in the spikes and get pulled out. Long grass will. So basically, what is the point here? The point is that in all these cases, it's a little bit common sense. In other words, we're looking at the situation and saying, is this a case where you are likely to pull grass out or not? Living grass out or not? So it depends. Seasonal, what are you wearing? What kind of shoe? What kind of grass? All of these factors can come into it. But the point is that it's irrelevant because nowadays, we hold like Rabbi Shimon nowadays. Rabbi Shimon says, Davar she'eino mitkaven is mutar. That anything that you don't intend to happen, if it's not a pasek resheh, if it's not inevitable, then it's allowed. So since walking on the grass, it's not inevitable that you're going to pull grass out of the ground, it's okay. Because we follow Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yehuda says that Davar she'eino mitkaven is asur, that you're not allowed to do something where that you're responsible for unintended consequences on Shabbat, basically. Rabbi Shimon says you're not responsible. So you can walk on grass under any circumstance because your intention is not to pull out the grass and the result is not inevitable.
What's the statistical probability of Davar she'lo mitkaven? Is it 50-50? That's
a whole big discussion. There's a whole big discussion. I mean, I think that the most common... I've seen different opinions about it. Because, one of the issues that comes up is that, if you really want to go into take a scientific approach, you could say, well, everything is really determined. Everything's really, if you did a study, and you analyzed a situation from a physics perspective and engineering, you could determine you're going to pull out exactly this blade of grass and all that. It could be very exact. So my way of what I think is the simplest way to understand that, and I'm just saying my opinion because there are different views about, maybe a certain percentage likelihood would be 51% definitely is still davar she'eino mitkaven, but maybe 95%. There are different ways of looking at it, and it is discussed among the contemporary poskim and the achronim and things like that. I think that the simplest way to understand it is, when you do this, are you expecting it to be inevitable? Because really we're looking at it from the perspective of davar she'eino mitkaven. We're looking at it from the perspective of a person's intention. So let's say, like somebody once asked me, well, anything is only 99% sure. Maybe it'll be a fluke. You open the fridge, and maybe the light won't go on. You didn't loosen the light, but sometimes it doesn't go on. So maybe it's not davar she'eino, maybe it's not pasik reshe, maybe it's not inevitable. But the answer is, from your perspective, you expect it as a definite. So the way I look at it is, do you expect it as a definite? Okay, and I think that's the easiest way to understand the concept. Although I know that there are other interpretations that look at it more statistically. This makes sense to me because davar she'eino mitkaven is really about your kavanah. So, and how you look at the situation. So, Amar Rami Bar Chama, Amar Rav Asi. Rami Bar Chama said in the name of Rav Asi, Asur ladam sheyichov ishto ledvar mitzvah. It's prohibited for a man to force his wife for a mitzvah, which means for having marital relations. Shene'emar va'atz beraglayim choteh, because it says that one who rushes with his feet is sinning. V'amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says, Kol hakofeh ishto ledvar mitzvah. That Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says that if you force your wife to submit to marital relations, you're going to have children who are no good. Amar Rav Ika bar Chanina. Rav Ika bar Chanina said, what is the basis for this in the pasuk? Because it says, Gam belo da'at nefesh lo tov, that without knowledge, without consent, they're using the word da'at here to mean consent, a soul is not good, meaning the soul that's produced as a result of this forced relations will not be good. Tanya Namiyachi, we learned in a Braita similarly that Gam belo da'at nefesh lo tov, ze hakofeh ishto ledvar mitzvah, that without consent the soul is no good. This is a person who forces his wife to submit to marital relations. Va'at v'raglayim choteh, a person who rushes with his feet is sinning. Ze bo'el v'shoneh, this is a person who has relations once and then repeats it again. Marital relations twice. Is that really true? Ve'amar Rava says famously, a famous saying that Rava said that if you want all of your children to be boys, yiv'ol v'ishneh, then you should have relations twice, not just once. This has to do with the fact that there's a concept in the Talmud that if the woman finishes the act of relations first, then you'll have male children. So the idea is that since you already had relations once and things are already warmed up, so to speak, in the passion that's going on, so therefore if you do it a second time, the likelihood is that she will reach the end of the process earlier than you will, and therefore you're going to have male children. That's putting it right. Isha ki tazriya is the basis for that. Exactly. Isha mazrat techila is when you have a boy. So that's the famous interpretation there. And I'm trying to put it in as discrete language as I can think of. So okay, lo kasha. So this is not a. So the problem is that according to Rava, but you see the Gemara was not shy about these things. You read Masekhet Ketubot, Masekhet Kiddushin. I mean, the Gemara didn't think we're very influenced. We're in Nida for sure, but we're very influenced by Christian society where we think like, talking about sexual matters is taboo. It's not that we don't believe in being tsanua, being modest about those things, definitely. But when you're talking intellectually and you're talking in the framework of Torah, it's Torah, that's it. We don't have to be shy about it. We use clean language, but we don't have to be shy about it. Lakasha. So the problem was that Rava says that you're supposed to do this double marital relations, and before we're saying no, that's atz beraglaim choteh, that's rushing with your feet, you're a sinner. You shouldn't do it twice. So what's the resolution? Lakasha. Kan ledat, kan shelo ledat. It depends. If the wife is willing, that's a different story. The wife is willing. If the wife is not interested, then you're forcing her to double. That's no good. Okay, and that's why. So originally, that's why in the Braita before, or I'm sorry, in the Braita before, it was on the topic of forcing the wife. So that's why it says you can't do it twice. But when it's not forcing, twice is fine, if that's what they want to do. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said, Amar Rav, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Kol isha shetovat ba'ala lidvar mitzvah, haviana banim shafilu b'dor shel Moshe lo hayu kimotan. Any woman who demands, it literally means relations from her husband, she will have children that are greater than the generation of Moshe. That there were none comparable to him even in the generation of Moshe. Because when it comes to the generation of Moshe, they sought people to be judges who were chachamim, nivonim, viduim. Wise, understanding, and well known. That we see that when Moshe Rabbeinu actually describes in Sefer Dvarim what he did, he says, I took chachamim viduim, but it doesn't say nivonim. It says they were wise and they were famous, but they were not nivonim, they were not men of understanding. So that means he wasn't able to find nivonim. He wasn't able to find. But with regard to Leah, it says, remember that when Yaakov comes home, Leah goes out and runs out to get him to spend the night together because she traded the flowers that she had to Rachel to be able to spend the night with Yaakov. And what happens? They have Yisachar. Uchtiv, and it says about Yisachar, it says about the tribe of Yisachar that they were Yod'e Bina La'itim. They knew, they had understanding of the times. Ladat Ma Yaseh Yisrael, Rashem Matayim, Chol HaChayim Al Piyem. That it says with regard to the people of Yisachar, the tribe of Yisachar, these were the wisest people who knew. Literally, Bina La'itim probably means they knew astronomy also. They knew the Kiddush HaChodesh. They knew how to determine the calendar. These were great Chachamim. And it uses the term Bina. Okay, so Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't find people who were Nivonim, Bina. They didn't have understanding. But the people of Yisachar have Bina. And what do they come from? They come from Leah. And what did Leah do? She was Tova'at et Bala Lidvar Mitzvah. She came and demanded her husband to come to her. Okay, so you see, it resulted in wisdom. V'eni, is that really true? V'amar Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi. Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi said, Eser klalot nitkala Chava. There were 10 curses that Chava was cursed with. Dechtiv Elisha Amar. It says that Hashem said to the woman, Harba Arbe. First, I will greatly increase. Elu shenei tipei damim. Achat dam nida ve'achat dam betulim. These are the two sources of blood in the woman. One is dam nida, the menstrual blood, and the other one is the blood of first relations, the virginal blood. Itzvonech, your sadness. Zeh tzar gidul banim. This is the pain of raising children. Veheronech, and pregnancy. Zeh tzara ibur. This is the pain of pregnancy. Be'etzev teledivanim. You will have children in pain or with suffering. Kimashma'o. That's literal. We understand what that means. Ve'elishech tishukatech. Your desire will be for your husband. Melamed sha'isha mishtokeket al ba'ala b'shashiyot derech. This means that a woman pines for her husband and misses her husband's presence when he goes out on a trip. V'uyim sholbach. He will control over you. Melamed sha'isha tovat belev v'ha'ish tovea bapeh. This shows you that the woman only tries in her heart. She tries to woo the man to marital relations, but the man demands with his mouth, meaning he's more direct. He's explicit in his demands maritally. Zoe midat tova b'nashim, and actually this is a good quality of women, that they're more shy about marital relations. So wait a second. You just told me that the woman who demands marital relations is the one that's going to have these great chachamim as children. Now you're telling me that the fact that a woman is shy about doing that is a good midah. So which one is it? So kikamrinan dimeratzia artsuye. What we're talking that dimeratzia artsuye kameh means that she entices him by looking beautiful, by being nice to him. In other words, it's not that she is a vulgar, very direct woman. It means that she romances him. She romances him in a nice way, in an indirect way. So she's still tznu'ah about it. She's still modest about it, but she gets what she wants to happen. Okay, so that's the point. So when we talk about Leah, when we talk about the woman who is tova'at dvar mitzvah, so that means that she does what she needs to do to orchestrate it that her husband is going to come to her, but she doesn't. But when it says that it's a good midah to be humble and modest about it, it means the way she does it is in a modest way. She doesn't do it in a vulgar way. But wait a second. You told me there were going to be 10 curses of Chava. Why is that only 7? You only gave me 7 curses. Where are the other 3? Rav Dimi said, Atufa ke'avel. she is wrapped like a mourner. In those days, the mourners used to wrap their heads like the way that the Baba Saleh, like they would put around their face, and they would cover it describes the Mitzorah actually like that. The Mitzorah he's atuf, so he puts the thing around his head, like an avel. That's what they used to do during Shiva, and they discontinued it. Historically, it's an interesting historical thing. The Yemenites, they still do it, the Teimanim, because of the Rambam, but in both Sephardim and Ashkenazim discontinued this thing of atifat harosh during Avelut. We don't see that anymore practiced, but it used to be done. Right, so that's the big day al menuta and all that she would wear the big day al menuta. That's right. So so it says she's atufaka avel. Why is the woman wrapped like an avel? Because she covers her head. The woman would cover her hair. She wouldn't go out with her head uncovered. And umnuda mikol adam. She is separated from all people. V'chavusha bevet asurin, and she's imprisoned. So let's see what this means exactly. So my minuda mikol adam. What do you mean that she is separate from all men? Are you telling me because she's not allowed to be alone with another man? But a man is also not allowed to be alone with a woman who's not his wife. So that's not something special about a woman. And you're telling me curses of a woman. So rather what it means is she can't have a second husband. The man has a wife. One day he gets up in the morning, he decides, you know what? I don't like this wife. He can marry a second wife. I mean, he could get rid of the first one, but let's say he wants to keep her. She cooks very good shakshuka, and dafina. He says, I don't like you, but I'm going to keep you for that, and I'm going to get a younger wife, also. So he goes and he finds another wife. But the wife says, listen, I don't like my husband, he's unattractive, he's not nice. She doesn't have a choice. She can't get a second husband. Doesn't work. So
what happened with the Arabs? They marry Jewish women, and after a while they take a second.
Mm-hmm.
An Arab lady, and the first one they enslaved her to.
Right, to work in the house, right. Right, so and the Arabs are, in the Arab countries. I mean, even among the Jews, they would marry, and then when the wife got older, they'd marry again, have more children, whatever. They did that. But the wife, even if she's unhappy, or maybe not unhappy, but let's say she could imagine, having more excitement in her life if she had somebody new. She has no choice. The guy has a choice. So that's what it means. Minuda mikol adam. She's literally it means like she's an outcast from other people. She doesn't have a choice to have another husband. And what's the third curse? It was that she is chavusha bevet asurin, means she's stuck in the house, meaning that she's expected to be very modest and to stay in the home. She's not expected to go out and be part of public life. Okay, so those are the three additional curses. Now, okay, in a Braita we learned megadelet se'ar kililit, that she grows long hair like Lilith, like a demon. So she has hair issues. See, that's one of the things I always say, Shelo asani isha, Baruch Shelo asani isha. I wake up in the morning and look at my hair. I don't have to work on it at all, but a woman has long hair and it takes a very long time in the shower, and then drying it and doing it. We don't have these problems. Men don't have these problems. So we're very fortunate. That's a curse that she has to deal with that. She sits when she urinates like an animal. And she's a pillow to her husband, meaning that the husband will be on top of her. So these are three more curses that she has. So ve'idach, why did the previous list not include these 3 points? So they said because hanei sheva hula. These are all good. What's the problem? Having long hair, it's not such a big deal. Maybe it could be good. I can't see how. But at least 2 of them could be good. Now the Gemara doesn't address the long hair thing. It's a long hair thing that's definitely a curse. But the other 2, the way she goes to the bathroom and the way that she's like a pillow for her husband, maybe those are not so bad. Why? Because Rabbi Chia said, "My dichtiv." What does it mean when it says in the pasuk, and this is from Iyov, "Malefeno mibahamot aretz umeov hashamayim yichakemenu." It says that you will teach us from the animals of the land and from the birds of the sky. You make us wise. Malafenu mibamot zo preda shekoraat umashtenet mayim umeov hashamayim yachkem. And it's so first of all, that's the preda. That is the mule that crouches and urinates. In other words, in a sitting position, goes to the bathroom. And it's saying that we learn from the animal this principle. In other words, that one should be tsanua, one should be modest in the bathroom. So the way that a woman goes to the bathroom is actually more modest. She sits down and you don't see anything. So in a way that's not a curse. It's a curse in the way that it's more difficult. For example, it's more difficult for a woman to go to the bathroom in certain circumstances. So it could be viewed as a curse, but it could also be construed as a positive because of tzniut, because of modesty. So for example, one time I was stuck on the road for 3 hours. There was an accident on 95. For 3 or 4 hours, 3 hours, I think we were stuck in the same place. And you saw the men are getting out of the car, they go into the woods, they can go to the bathroom, no problem. The women, they can't go. So when we get to the rest stop, after 3 hours, the line for the woman's bathroom was out the door. The first one, because they need to use a bathroom. They need to sit down. It's much harder for them. So that could be viewed as a negative. It could also be viewed as a positive. And we say, furthermore, that from the birds of the sky, you make us wise. Zotar negol. This is talking about the rooster. Because the rooster romances its mate before they have relations. We're going to see what that means. Rabbi Yochanan says, we would, if we didn't have the Torah, we would learn modesty from the cat, because a cat never wants anyone to be around when it goes to the bathroom. If you ever notice, the cat will wait till everyone's gone, then it goes to the bathroom, and it always covers up its waist. So we would learn not to steal from the ant. Ants work very hard, and they never take from one another. Every ant does its own job, and they don't try to take from what belongs to other people. We would learn sexual prohibitions from the yonah, because the dove is true to its mate. It's faithful to its mate. It's a monogamous animal, so that's a positive. And derech eretz mitar negol, we would learn proper marital relations from the rooster, who first is mifayes, first romances its mate before having relations. How does it romance? We want to know what is the romantic talk of the rooster. You know what it's saying? So Amar Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda said that Rav says, this is what the rooster says. And Rashi explains how this works. We'll read it in a second. Zabinen alech ziga de matulech ad karech. That before they have relations, he says to her, I'm going to buy you a coat that goes down to your feet. So Rashi says, how do we see that the rooster says this? Because when the rooster has relations, it opens up its wings like this, and it's saying, look, I'm going to make you a nice, coat. So it's moving its arms like, I'm going to make you a coat that covers your whole body. And after the act is done, Amarla, he says to him, Lishamtete lekarbalte dahu tarnegola. May the what's it called? The thing on the top of the head of the tarnagol, the comb. Okay, may the comb of this rooster be removed.
May the crest.
Okay, the crest they call it there. Okay, idle velo zabinin alech. If he has the money to afford this coat and he doesn't buy it for you. In other words, if he has the means to do it and doesn't buy it for you. So in other words, beforehand he sweet talks the wife, and then afterwards he reinforces, if I don't do what I said, may my beauty be gone. So he's a very, very he's a Casanova, the rooster, and therefore we learn from that a person should romance their mate, should romance their wife, and look at and make sure to take care of their wife, and make them feel loved, and make sure that it's not just about the physical act of intimacy, but about the emotional component as well.